This is our fourth video in the Microvellum Made Easy series. And just a quick recap, in our previous three videos, we covered first understanding cut parts. And so in that, we originally created a single cut part from an empty product, and then we grew from that and built on that to understanding products. And we made this cabinet box from scratch with sides, bottom, stretchers, back, nailers. And then last video, we covered sub-assemblies, and we walked through how sub-assemblies work, a little bit about their anatomy, and we inserted these doors and the shelf sub-assemblies. And today, I want to talk about material, go through just how materials work, and at a high level, understanding what are materials, how you can interact with them, and about their properties. So just to get started, I want to first talk about what are materials. And looking at a product, essentially every cut part that you add in a product requires a material. So here, we covered this before at a high level, but like our left side, you can see in their material name, I've got white melamine 16 millimeter two side. So for this cut part to draw, or for it to allow me to finish even adding it to the product, but for it to draw in 3D and in 2D, and for it to process in your work order, you have to have a material in your material file assigned to it. So you can have no edge banding, you can have other things not assigned, but you have to have a material and a quantity, a width, a length, and a name. So these fields are the required minimum. And so I can see here, as we did before, I can pick a pointer, as I did in this case. I can see sheet stock. And this is a good intro, is there's actually different types of materials in your material file. So you have sheet stock, which is mostly what we're going to cover today, but there's also solid stock and buyout, which are different types of materials. And essentially, they're very much like sheet stock. So if you think of sheet stock, that is something with a thickness, width, and length that comes in sheets, and you have quantities. Solid stock is more, think of like lumber or moldings. And then buyouts is just a way that Microvellum gives us to basically create materials to assign to parts that are not going to be cut on a machine in your shop. So those are three different types, and we're going to focus on sheet stock today. Hardware and edge banding are other kind of types of materials, but those are totally different categories in Microvellum that we will cover in separate videos altogether. So now that we know what materials are, how do you access them and how do you interact with them? So you can do this a couple of ways. You can go through your project properties, and a lot of you, when you create a new this pops up, and in here you have this project materials tab. And so it's important to notice is here what I'm accessing is the materials for the selected specification group. So if you have multiple spec groups in your project, if you change them, it is going to show you here the materials from that spec group. So this is one way to interact with your materials and see your materials. And just to clarify, my materials, specifically my sheet stock, are over here. And I want to point out also, I've got my solid stock and buyout. You can also see your edge band and hardware, which is what I mentioned. They're kind of materials, but it's a little bit confusing. They are their own category, and they're actually in their own spec group components. So we're going to not focus on those today. And you can see over here, we've got pointers. We'll talk about that in a different video as well. So we're going to focus over here on this right side, and specifically on our sheet stock and solid stock. The other way you can access them is by going into your project specification groups interface, or I can actually access that also just through, let it reload, toolbox setup, project specification groups. And again, you'll notice up here, I went to project specification groups. So the two options I've showed you so far are materials in my project, not template or library level. So once I'm here, again, I have my two spec groups. I can pick which spec group I want to go to the materials, and then you have this open material file. And that gets us to the same interface we were looking at before. Again, pointers on the left side, we'll cover in another video. Over on the right are my materials. So those are the different ways you can access materials. There's actually a third way through the workbook designer in the spreadsheet, so to speak. And I will cover that in another video as well. Today, we're going to focus on just through our materials interfaces. So within materials, we have different types of materials. And so here we're at our materials that are tied to a project spec group. And so you'll see I have a folder called formula generated. So if you're in one of the newer libraries, you probably have some of these. And the way you know that there are, aside from being in a category, is the text is red. And so all of these red means formula in general in Microvellum. And so these are all formula materials, which means that the name and different attributes behind them are formulated to change based on logic. Then I have regular materials, which have black text. Now, there's a third category that is clonable materials. So you see this little green dot here. That means these are all not clonable. And I don't know that I have any, but I can make some to show what that does. Clonable, though, they would be blue. And what that means is that if they're clonable in my library, in my template spec groups, when I create a new project, those clonable materials will automatically get copied to project level materials so that I can fully edit them. So I mentioned before, all these green ones here, these are not clonable. So what that means is I can't double click, I can't right click. You'll see I don't have edit selected material as an option here. I can only copy it or associate it to a pointer. And that's because this is a library level material. So it has all of the attributes. You'll see my thickness, my grain, the name, everything is set at the template level, at the library level. And the only thing I can really do to edit this material within my project is rename it. And I can do that through find and replace. So again, up here, you'll see project. This window is black. I'm in my project spec group, and I'm in my project materials for the metric decorative laminate spec group. And if I wanted, for example, to use PL1 spec group, which one I'm in here, and all my stuff's already assigned as PL1, and I wanted this instead to say PL2, for example, or I wanted PL1 to be replaced with the code of the laminate. For these green non-clonable materials, library level materials, I have the ability to right click and find and replace within this category. And so one thing I'll note, I'm right clicking at the folder level. That's going to find and replace inside this category. So it's only going to affect materials, but it's going to affect all of them that are under this folder. So I can find and replace, and I can find PL1, and I'm going to replace it everywhere with PL2. So you'll see now, when I go down here, all of the PL1s change to PL2. That is kind of like the most basic legacy way that Microvellum materials work, is you have your template spec group set up, you have all of the common materials sheet stock names that you need with the thicknesses that you need assigned, and you can just find and replace at the project level so that they say what you want them to say. Now, if I needed to edit anything else besides the name or the description for this material, because this is a library level material, not clonable, my only option is to copy this to the project level. So every material file in a project has this folder that is _project and then the name of your project. So I've got a project called How Microvellum Works, and this folder is that. And so when we talk about project level materials, those are materials that have been copied to the project level and are fully editable in that project, and they only exist in that project, not in our template. So I can create new materials here. I can add a material. And you'll see I can add a formula material. We're not going to do that. I'll cover that in another video, but I can just add a material. And so let's talk about the anatomy and the attributes of materials. So we've got our description, and I can type anything in here, save for special characters and things. So I can 0.75, black, melamine, two-side, for example. You have a thickness, which has to be non-zero, I believe, for it to let you save this. So I could say it's 0.75. You have a code, and so this is a field. If you use a gantry system or an inventory system, this might be your SKU that is recognized by your inventory system or other software, or it could just be something that you decide, maybe we say, 3/4 BLK 4/8, whatever your SKU system is, you could put that there. Comments is another field you can use for anything really. It could be something you want to come through on reports or the like. Markup, waste factor, and label value. I'm not going to talk about those. There's documentation on those, but those are related to if you use Microvellum for estimating purposes. You can set the grain here, length, width, or none. So none means there is no grain. Width means the grain is across. Length means normal with the length of the sheet, the longest dimension. This phase 6 only flip setting only matters if you nest, if you have a nesting processing station, and it just means that parts assigned to this, if it's like a one-sided material, I want the CNC to be able to flip it if there's machining on the other side. Hatching, this is just to assign one of these hatches for when you cut sections of a product with this part. Region, mostly won't apply, but there is some region here that I think will affect units. Extended data, again, there's some 3 extra fields that you can use for additional data that maybe needs to come through. And then you have sheet sizes, and you can assign multiple sheet sizes. And in here, you can set the quantity available. Default is 2000. You can set a width, which I'm in metric, but if it were imperial, it'd be 48 by 96, for example, for a 4x8. Your optimization priority, if you have multiple sheet sizes, your trims and all that stuff. And you can actually set an estimate price by sheet size. So we won't get too far in depth, but every material has all these fields available. So I can create a material, a project level material, and you'll notice that the little dot here is black. This is a project level material. And what that means is this only exists in the project level, whereas all these are library level. So if I go to my library spec groups, these materials are going to be there. Something else you'll notice, remember I renamed these, and you can actually see here when I click on it, it says material database name. That is basically the name in the library at the template level. And then the material name at the project level, you'll see it says PL1, PL2. So that name still exists at the library level. And if I open my template spec groups, this material will still be named that. And my project level, my spec group level name is just listed here because I did the find and replace. We talked about non-clonable materials. We talked about creating a project level material. Clonable materials, how do they work? So if I go to toolbox setup, library specification groups, and depending on how your server, your setup is and what level permissions you have, you might not be able to access this, but admin level users can access this. And essentially, and you'll see this red is important. This means I'm accessing the template spec groups. And these are what, anytime anybody creates a new project, this is what gets copied. And this is what is in your projects when you create a new. So if I wanted to create a clonable material so that every time I create a new project, automatically they get copied to project level, I would have to do that here. And so you notice right off the bat, I don't have that project folder anymore because I'm not in a project, but I have all the same other materials. And none of these are clonable yet, but why would I want a clonable material? As I mentioned before, a lot of the time you may always want to be able to edit the thickness and sheet sizes of your materials in your projects. So because you can find and replace the description and rename descriptions of non-clonable library level materials, but nothing else, you can't edit the thickness of those. So for shops that I have a common material name set up and pointers assigned, but I need to be able to edit the thickness, you can set those up to be clonable so that when you create a new project and it automatically creates those project spec groups, you now have all project level materials of exactly what you need already assigned to your pointers. For example, if I wanted to, let me copy, let me make this material. I wonder if I can do all of them. Let me see if I can shift. Yep, mark selection as clonable. So what I'm doing is now changing all these as blue. So you'll see everything except for this negative material now in the PO1 grain category is clonable. Okay, so, and I did that at the template level. So now if I create a new project, and what it's actually doing right now is it's syncing those materials and copying everything and loading what's needed. All right, so now if I go to my materials, you'll see I have copies of all those materials at the project level, and they're black. I can double click these and edit them. So what it did is now I've got my material file set up so that I automatically have copies of what I need at the project level that I know I might need to edit. So I can still come here and right click, find and replace, and I can say I want to replace PL1 with PL2. Or maybe let's do PL3. And then as I maybe get materials in and mic them, for example, this 17.5 core, yeah, see, I have 19.5 here. I might mic this and it might be 17.85, or it might be, 18.9. I can actually edit that thickness. I could edit the comments. I could change my sheet sizes, all here at the project level fully, instead of, down here where these materials, I can't do that. So it gives you fully editable materials ready to go at the project level to then be able to use and assign in your pointers. Just to recap, we have covered what are materials, how you can access them through the project materials interface through here, or through project specification groups, go to the project materials. And we've talked specifically about sheet stock. What are the different types? We have formula-driven materials, which are these red ones. We'll cover in depth in a video. And I actually have a video that I will link here that talks a little bit about the benefits of those. And then clonable and non-clonable materials. And we also covered how to access project level spec groups materials versus library level. You can rename through find and replace or creating project materials. Now, all this coming full circle to, let me go back to my other project that I have this product in. That if I go into the part properties of this, all of this gives me materials that I can assign to any of these cut parts. So I can go to my sheet stock and I can pick that project level. Remember, we made the 3/4 black melamine and assign it to my part. And now this part is going to be cut on that material, which the thickness, the name, the grain are all defined in the material across any parts that are assigned to it. In our next videos, we will cover hardware, which is another type of material, which is in its own spec group component. And then in another video, we'll cover edge banding as well, and kind of bring this full circle to a third video about formulated materials, which you can do for all of these: formulated hardware, formulated sheet stock, formulated edge banding. So I hope this helps. I hope you guys learned something. And until next time on this Microvellum Made Easy series.